There was a kind of silence that lived inside Annabel Harrow, a silence born not from peace but from years of being told what a young lady of her standing must be. From the outside, her world looked polished. Gloved hands, polite smiles, a future tied neatly with ribbons of duty and well-placed expectations. Yet within her, a soft longing pressed at the edges, whispering of a life no one had ever allowed her to imagine. She moved through the hallways of Harrow Manor as though walking through a museum dedicated to the dreams of others. Portraits of stern ancestors watched her with unspoken demands, each one a reminder of the path she was meant to follow. And still, beneath her graceful composure, something restless stirred. What happens when a soul begins to recognize the weight of its own freedom, even before it knows what to do with it? In the early mornings, when mist curled around the countryside like a quiet shroud, Annabel often slipped outside before anyone awoke. Those stolen minutes were her rebellion, small, nearly invisible acts of defiance against a life arranged by others. She wandered the gardens barefoot, the wet grass clinging to her hem, feeling more alive in those moments than in any ballroom. There, she allowed her thoughts to drift toward worlds she had never seen, toward choices she had never been allowed to make. It seemed almost humorous, in a tender sort of way, how society believed control guaranteed order. Who hasn't known the tremor that comes when the heart gently resists what the world insists upon? And yet, rebellion is rarely loud at first. Sometimes it begins as a sigh. By mid-morning, the household awakened, and the facade resumed. Servants bustled, doors opened, carriages rolled across gravel. Annabel slipped back into the shape expected of her, a well-mannered heiress, poised and agreeable, preparing for the marriage her family had arranged. A union built not on affection, but on alliances and bloodlines. She listened politely at breakfast as her father discussed dowries and land, her mother correcting her posture with a glance. They mistook her quiet for acceptance, though it was really a practiced restraint that kept her from shattering the illusion. How many people live this way, carrying a truth so fragile they fear even their own breath might disturb it? Yet even illusions crack when pressed long enough. And Annabel's patience, though gentle, had edges. That afternoon, while trying on the gown chosen for her engagement announcement, she saw her reflection not as a bride-to-be, but as a woman trapped within someone else's tale. The lace felt like a woven cage, the pearls a reminder of expectation disguised as generosity. Her fingers trembled as she touched the fabric, sensing a subtle awakening beneath her calm exterior. A question rose within her, sharp and bright. What would happen if, for once, she simply refused? The thought startled her with its boldness and its truth. Sometimes life shifts not with thunder, but with a single breath. And Annabel, in that small, fitting room lit by the afternoon sun, took the quietest breath of her life, one that tasted of rebellion and unspoken fate. She lifted her chin, a gesture so slight no one else would have noticed. Yet it carried the weight of a decision forming deep beneath her ribs. Even she did not fully understand it yet, but the air seemed to thicken around her, as though the universe leaned closer to listen. Why is it that the heart often knows the answer long before the mind dares to accept it? Somewhere within her, the first threads of transformation had begun to weave. And so, in a manner where everyone believed they understood her destiny, Annabel Harrow felt the first spark of a future she might one day claim as her own. She did not speak her truth, not yet. Words held power, and she knew they must be chosen with care. But her silence had changed tone. It was no longer the silence of compliance, but the silence that comes before a storm. A quiet rebellion, delicate yet unstoppable, was unfurling within her. And though she could not see it yet, this single moment would draw someone unexpected into her life, someone who would test every boundary she had ever known. For just beyond the horizon, fate was already moving toward her, and its footsteps were anything but quiet. In the same country lanes where Annabel's quiet rebellion had begun to bloom, another figure moved with very different intentions. His name was Captain James Ashford, the local constable whose life had been shaped by duty more than by dreams. He rode up the gravel drive of Harrow Manor with the solemn air of a man accustomed to bad news and worse expectations. To the villagers, he was a steady presence, a man who walked beside trouble yet never quite dragged it home. But even a steady man carries his own shadow, especially when he steps into the world of the wealthy. James had seen enough of the gentry to know that trouble often wore silk gloves and smiled politely. He had been summoned, not invited, and that distinction was not lost on him. As he dismounted, he felt the weight of unseen eyes from tall windows above the courtyard. Protecting someone who did not want his protection was never an easy task. Yet this was the role fate had quietly assigned him on that pale morning. Inside the manor, Annabelle listened as her father explained that recent letters had caused concern for the family's reputation. Strange notes, unsigned, had arrived warning of enemies and financial ruin if she did not proceed with the arranged marriage. Her father spoke as though her future were a chess piece being moved for the safety of the board. James, standing at a respectful distance, heard only fragments, but enough to know there was more than simple mischief at play. He recognized the undercurrent of conflict that rises when fear and pride share the same sentence. To him, this was not about a society match. It was about leverage and threats whispered in the dark. Annabelle, however, felt only the tightening of a life already too confined for her own heart. She looked at the constable once, measuring him with quiet curiosity. How often does a stranger become responsible for a life they barely understand? And what happens when that stranger must guard not only a body, but an awakening soul? From that day forward, James's presence became a subtle, unwanted addition to the routines of Harrow Manor. He walked the grounds with an air of quiet vigilance, taking note of shadows that did not match the light. Servants watched him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion, unsure if he was there to protect or to pry. Annabelle saw him through windows and across courtyards, a figure that did not quite belong to her world. Yet there was something in his posture, a respectful restraint, that set him apart from the men who spoke about her as if she were property. He did not bow too deeply, nor stare too long, but acknowledged her with the same gravity he gave to her father. It puzzled her more than flattery would have done. She had met many men chasing her status. This one seemed interested only in her safety. Could that, in itself, be a rare kind of honor in a world so willing to trade people for profit? The question lingered with her longer than she expected. James, for his part, had not asked for this assignment. He preferred clear crimes and obvious villains, not veiled threats wrapped in fine stationery. Yet as he reviewed the anonymous letters, he sensed a pattern too deliberate to ignore. Someone knew the inner workings of Harrow Manor, and someone wanted to push Annabelle toward a future she clearly resisted. In his reports, he used formal language, but in his thoughts he named it plainly: coercion. Each day, his concern for her shifted from professional obligation to something more human, though he tried to deny it. He noticed the way she walked alone in the gardens at dawn, chasing a freedom she never spoke of aloud. He saw the way she hid her longing behind measured smiles at the breakfast table. Haven't you seen it too? When a person's eyes reveal the life they wish they were living. James began to realize he was protecting more than a title. He was guarding a fragile awakening. One evening, as the sun melted into the fields beyond the manor, their paths crossed more directly. Annabelle had slipped out to the far edge of the estate, where the trimmed lawns gave way to wild meadow. She thought herself unseen, but James had followed at a distance, drawn by both duty and something he would not yet name. When a branch snapped under his boot, she turned sharply, startled by the sudden break in silence. For a heartbeat, they simply looked at one another, both caught off guard by the intimacy of being so far from watchful eyes. He apologized for alarming her, explaining that his orders were to ensure her safety at all times. She replied with a faint, wry smile that safety and captivity sometimes looked very much alike. The honesty of her words struck him harder than any accusation could have. In that fragile pause, he understood how different their positions were and how strangely aligned their hearts might become. Something in the air between them changed, as if the story itself had taken a quiet step forward. That night, James lay awake in his small quarters near the stables, hearing the wind move through the old stone walls. He turned over every detail in his mind: the letters, the pressures, the way Annabelle's gaze held both courage and doubt. He knew that if the threats were real, they would not stop at words, and the thought tightened his chest. He also knew that the greater danger now was not only outside the manor, but within himself. A protector who begins to care too deeply walks a thin line between clarity and distraction. Annabelle, in her room above, stared at the ceiling and wondered what it meant to trust someone she barely knew. Was fate placing him in her life as a guardrail, or as a mirror to her own unseen strength? The house slept, but their thoughts did not, circling the same silent questions, and somewhere between those restless breaths, a new thread bound their stories just a little tighter. Whatever waited in the shadows beyond Harrow Manor, it would soon test whether this unwanted protector was ready to become something more than just a man of duty. Harrow Manor had always worn its grandeur like a polished mask, but James soon learned that every house of such stature carried a shadow of its own. Late in the evenings, when the corridors fell into that peculiar silence found only in old estates, the walls seemed to whisper fragments of conversations not meant for his ears. Servants exchanged glances laden with unspoken stories, while Annabelle's parents spoke in lowered tones whenever he appeared. It was the kind of atmosphere where a single misplaced word could travel down hallways like a warning. James felt it in his bones. The tension beneath the surface. The subtle shift of breathing when someone senses danger before recognizing its shape. Haven't you felt it too? That quiet prickle along the edges of awareness, as if the truth were walking beside you, waiting for its moment to be heard. Annabelle sensed it as well. She had lived her entire life within these walls, yet lately each familiar room carried a new weight. At dinners, she noticed her father's eyes dart toward the door, as though expecting someone, or avoiding something. Her mother's smiles had become too precise, too practiced. Every polite phrase seemed built around the avoidance of a single unnamed secret. And beneath it all, Annabelle felt her own doubt growing roots she could no longer ignore. Even the flowers in the conservatory, once her sanctuary, seemed to droop with unspoken heaviness. It is strange how even beauty can feel burdened when the heart begins to carry questions. She wondered whether anyone else sensed that something inside the manor was quietly unraveling, thread by thread. One afternoon, James overheard two footmen whispering near the staircase, their hushed tones slicing through the stillness. They spoke of a rumor, a visitor who had arrived weeks ago and met privately with Annabelle's father. Documents were signed, voices raised, and afterward the visitor vanished without a word. James stepped closer, and the footmen scattered like startled birds, leaving him only with fragments and an uneasy echo in his mind. He could not determine whether the threat came from inside or outside the estate, or whether it came from both. Yet he knew that danger rarely announced itself with grand gestures. Sometimes it entered a home through the smallest cracks. Isn't it strange how fear grows strongest when its source remains unseen? That evening, during a brief moment alone in the drawing room, Annabelle confronted her father with quiet strength. She asked about the letters, the visitor, and the sudden insistence on her marriage. He brushed her off with talk of propriety and family reputation, his tone rigid with burden. But Annabelle saw something flicker behind his composure. Anxiety, perhaps even guilt. She realized, in that fragile pause, that her fate was being shaped by currents she had not been allowed to witness. Her rebellion, once a whisper inside her own heart, now stood face to face with the hidden machinery of the life built around her. And the more her father avoided her questions, the clearer it became that the truth was not meant to reach her ears. James found her later, gazing out of a tall window as dusk settled over the manor grounds. The fading light painted her features with a softness that belied the storm within her. She spoke without turning, confessing that she felt trapped between fear and clarity, as though the world she thought she knew had shifted an inch to the left. He listened, understanding more than he wished to admit. He knew the signs, families protecting legacies, secrets hidden for generations, and threats disguised as politeness. Without overstepping, he told her that silence within a household is often the loudest alarm. His words struck her with their simplicity, and for the first time, she allowed herself to wonder whether her desire for freedom was not just a longing, but a necessity. Between them, an unspoken alliance began to form, yet neither of them realized how close the danger truly was. Later that night, as the manor slept, a figure moved through the outer corridor with deliberate steps. James, restless and alert, sensed movement beyond the edge of candlelight. Annabelle, in her room above, awoke with the unsettling feeling that someone had been standing outside her door. And somewhere in the estate, a drawer closed softly over a piece of paper containing a truth that could shatter everything. For in Harrow Manor, secrets did not remain buried for long, especially not the ones designed to protect power at any cost. And as dawn inched toward the horizon, one thing became clear. The whispers within the manor were no longer whispers at all. They were the beginning of something far more dangerous. Morning came wrapped in pale gold, but neither Annabel nor James found comfort in its quiet glow. For Annabel, the day began with the familiar tug of duty, like gloves laced too tightly around her wrists. For James Rowe, it began with the steady weight of responsibility, a habit he wore as naturally as his uniform. They stood on opposite sides of a world built long before either of them was born. She belonged to manicured gardens and polished etiquette. He belonged to muddy boots and necessary truths. And yet, something invisible drew their thoughts toward each other, a subtle pull that neither understood. It was the kind of tension that forms when two souls approach a boundary they were never meant to cross. Have you ever felt that quiet vibration in the air, when the universe seems to lean in a little too close? When desire and consequence stand side by side, waiting to see which one will speak first. They felt it, though neither dared to name it. Annabel's day unfolded in a swirl of visits, lessons, and expectations, each one tightening the loops around her freedom. Her mother insisted she rehearse polite conversation for the engagement dinner, as though her future depended on charm alone. James observed from a distance, his presence meant to reassure but increasingly reminding her of her confinement. He watched her smile with the softness of someone performing a role she never auditioned for. To someone less attuned, she might have looked content. But James had begun to notice the moments she fell into silence, when her thoughts seemed to wander beyond the manor walls. It puzzled him how such a refined life could look so much like captivity. He wondered, not for the first time, why freedom often appears more fragile than privilege. And Annabel, catching his gaze across the room, felt something within her shift once again, something that whispered she was no longer alone in her quiet awakening. Later, James accompanied her on a short walk across the grounds, more for security than companionship. The air carried the scent of damp earth and distant rain, grounding him, unsettling her. Every step between them measured a distance that society had scripted long before their birth. She asked him, with gentle defiance, whether he believed the threats against her were real. He hesitated. His instincts said yes, but he understood the cost of admitting it. "I believe," he said carefully, "that someone benefits from your obedience." Her breath caught at the truth in his words, truth she had never been allowed to hear spoken aloud. Even a small truth can feel like a thunderclap when your life has been shaped by polite untruths. She looked at him differently then, as though something hidden about him had come to light. And James, in noticing the shift, felt a warning in his chest, a boundary weakening. Their disagreement came unexpectedly. Annabel requested a few hours alone in the village, longing for a taste of ordinary life. James refused, citing the letters, the strange movements around the manor, the lingering danger. She accused him of treating her like a prisoner. He replied that she had never understood the risks. For a moment, their voices rose, clashing like warm breeze against cold steel. Then she fell silent, realizing she wasn't angry at him, but at the world that had cornered her. He too softened, regretting the firmness he carried like armor. Who hasn't spoken too sharply when fear disguises itself as authority? James apologized first, a rare thing for him, rarer still for a man in his position. But apologies do not erase the tension, they only illuminate it. By evening, they found themselves in the conservatory again, surrounded by fading light and flowers leaning toward night. Annabel traced the petals of a rose, wondering aloud how something so delicate could survive storms. James replied that storms did not break what learned when to bend. She smiled faintly, sensing the metaphor he had not intended, but also had not denied. Their worlds still clashed. But somewhere in that friction lay a truth neither was ready to face, a truth written not in words, cries, but in the spaces between them. As the lanterns dimmed, she thanked him, not for his protection, but for seeing her. He looked away, knowing that allowing such closeness was a risk he could not afford. And yet, he did not move. Sometimes the greatest danger is simply staying where your heart begins to notice things. That night, as rain whispered against the windows, the manor felt charged with invisible threads. Annabel replayed their disagreement, realizing it had revealed more than it had concealed. James paced his quarters, wrestling with the conflict between duty and the growing truth within him. He reminded himself that he was here to protect her, not to understand her, and certainly not to feel for her. But emotions do not bend to rules carved by society or stitched into uniforms. Outside, the wind rose, carrying hints of a coming storm, one neither of them could yet name. And somewhere deep within the manor, a door creaked open by unseen hands. A shadow moved through the corridor, deliberate and patient. Before dawn, someone would cross a line that should never have been crossed, and the fragile balance between Annabel and James would never be the same again. The next morning arrived draped in a muted gray, the kind that made even the birds hesitate before singing. James began his day as he always did, observing the manor with quiet vigilance, searching for evidence where others saw routine. Yet something felt different, as though the house itself were holding its breath. The uneasy tension of the previous night lingered, a reminder that unspoken truths often grow heavier with time. He noticed servants exchanging uneasy glances and doors closing just a little too quickly. Even Annabel, usually composed in her stillness, seemed to carry an invisible burden. It was clear that something was shifting beneath the polished surface of Harrow Manor. Haven't you felt it too? The moment when a secret becomes too loud to stay hidden, James sensed that the path ahead would reveal far more than he had been hired to protect, and his instincts seldom betrayed him. It happened almost by accident. James entered the study to review the letters again, hoping to find a pattern in their wording or timing. Lord Harrow had stepped out briefly, leaving the room quiet except for the ticking of a brass clock. As James scanned the desk, his attention caught on a drawer slightly ajar, barely noticeable unless one knew how to look. He hesitated, the weight of propriety pressing on him, but his duty pressed harder. Inside, beneath neatly arranged documents, lay a small leather-bound ledger. Its edges were worn, as though thumbed through by anxious hands. The moment he touched it, a shiver of knowing passed through him. Books that are hidden rarely contain harmless things. He opened it and the truth began to unravel. Names, dates, transactions, and beside them, meticulous notes linking financial arrangements to Annabel's engagement. It wasn't just a marriage contract. It was a business merger disguised as propriety, a rescue plan for the family's faltering estate. Her future was being traded in quiet ink strokes, as though she were an asset rather than a daughter. Worse still, the ledger contained payments to the same anonymous source from which the threatening letters had originated. Fear tightened James's chest as the realization settled. The threats were orchestrated from within. Someone was manipulating the Harrows, pushing Annabel toward a marriage she had never chosen. He closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself. Why is it that betrayal often hides in the places we are taught to trust? He knew this ledger was a key, one that could unlock danger as easily as truth. When Lord Harrow returned, James slipped into his watchful composure, though the weight of what he'd discovered pulsed beneath his calm. The Lord spoke with forced ease, avoiding James's gaze, discussing the engagement dinner as though nothing were amiss. But James now saw the exhaustion behind the man's posture, the type that grows from prolonged fear and desperate bargains. He wondered what choice had cornered the man into deception. Still, deception was deception, no matter how worn the hands that carried it. That afternoon, James sought Annabel in the conservatory, unsure whether he should reveal what he had learned. She stood among blooming roses, unaware that her world had already begun to tilt. He watched her for a moment, struck again by her gentleness and strength. How could he tell her that her life had been bartered piece by piece? The truth weighed on him like a blade pressed too close to the heart. Annabel noticed his tension before he spoke. She had grown attuned to his silences, recognizing when they held more than caution. James finally told her, not everything, but enough to reveal that her engagement held darker motives. Her face paled, not with shock, But with the steady grief of someone whose suspicions had finally found confirmation, she listened without interrupting, her fingers brushing the petals of a rose as though grounding herself. When he finished, she whispered, "So I was right to feel the walls closing in." He nodded, wanting to offer comfort, but bound by the limits of his role. Even so, the look in her eyes made something within him shift irrevocably. There are moments when truth becomes both a wound and a doorway, and this was one of them. Night fell with an urgent hush, as though the manor feared what the morning might bring. James hid the ledger in a safer place, knowing its discovery could cost him more than employment. Annabelle retreated to her room, replaying every choice she had been denied. Elsewhere in the house, footsteps moved with unsettling precision, someone searching for something missing. A door slammed. A voice cursed under breath. James watched from the shadows, instincts sharpened. Danger was no longer creeping, it was awake. The ledger had not gone unnoticed for long, and somewhere deep within Harrow Manor, a plan began to fracture, for what breaks open cannot easily be closed again. By dawn, someone would realize that the truth was slipping from their hands, and toward hers. The manor seemed unusually still that evening, as though the air itself were listening. Dinner had passed in a blur of forced civility, the family speaking of anything except what mattered. Annabelle moved through the corridors with a strange heaviness, each step echoing faintly beneath the chandeliers. James remained alert, his senses sharpened by the discovery of the ledger and the unease now pulsing through the house. He felt the darkness settle earlier than usual, as if night had hastened its arrival to cloak something unwelcome. There are moments when intuition speaks louder than reason, when instinct whispers, "Something is coming." James heard it in the stillness between footsteps. Annabelle felt it in her breath, lingering tight in her chest. Isn't it unsettling how danger often arrives disguised in silence rather than thunder? They both sensed the shift long before anything happened. Hours passed, the moon climbed, and the manor drifted into that half-sleep houses fall into when secrets are still awake. Annabelle retired early, though rest never came. Her mind replayed the truths James had shown her. The engagement, the ledger, the illusion of choice she'd lived under for years. Everything now carried new, sharper edges. She lay in her bed, staring at the carved ceiling, feeling a slow fear unfurl, not for her safety, but for what her life had almost become. Meanwhile, James took to patrolling the grounds, pacing along the gravel paths beneath the stars. He paused often, not because he was tired, but because something in the night unsettled him. A faint creaking, a shift of wind, the subtle wrongness of an open window. Small details, but significant to a trained eye. Sometimes danger does not announce itself. It simply steps into the room you thought was safe. And James could feel that presence drawing near. His instincts were no longer whispering, they were calling. It happened just past midnight. James had reached the northern corridor when he heard the faintest thud. Soft, deliberate, not the sound of a house settling. His breath stilled, the tension in his body rising like a tide. He moved without hesitation, each step silent, controlled, guided by years of experience. As he approached the library entrance, he saw a shadow move inside. Quick, determined, unmistakably human. Someone was searching, but for what? He pressed himself against the wall, listening to the rustling of papers and drawers sliding open with urgency. Isn't it unsettling how a single shadow can redefine the meaning of safety? James prepared to confront whoever had slipped inside. Inside the library, the intruder moved with uncanny knowledge of the room, heading straight for the desk where the ledger had been. James realized then, it wasn't a random break-in. Someone inside the manor had acted with purpose, but someone outside had come to retrieve what they feared had been discovered. Annabelle, awake in her room, sensed something amiss. A subtle shift in the air, a feeling of wrongness pressing against the walls. Fear nudged her out of bed, her bare feet cold against the wooden floor. She opened her door, hesitant, catching the faint glow of a lantern from the lower level. A strange, metallic presence filled the hallway, as if danger had taken shape just beyond her reach. Downstairs, James stepped into the library doorway, confronting the figure cloaked in black. The intruder froze, then bolted toward the back exit, knocking over a lamp. Glass shattered. Flames flickered. In one heartbeat, the manor shifted from unease to crisis. James lunged after him, but the intruder escaped through an open window, disappearing into the darkness of the estate grounds. The fire, though small, spread quickly across fallen papers and polished wood. James smothered the flames with a heavy curtain, coughing through the smoke as he stomped out the last sparks. Annabelle reached the library just as the room filled with haze, her eyes widening with alarm. He turned toward her, breathless, his shirt streaked with soot, an image that seared itself into her memory. "There was someone here," he said, voice rough. "Someone looking for what your father hid." Annabelle's heart pounded, not from the smoke, but from the realization that her life had stepped fully into danger. The ledger was no longer a secret. The threat was no longer silent, and neither of them could pretend otherwise. Later, as the flames were contained and the house settled into a tense quiet, James and Annabelle stood alone in the corridor. The lantern light flickered across their faces, illuminating fear, resolve, and something deeper neither dared name. "Why would someone break in?" she whispered, her voice trembling with equal parts dread and awakening clarity. James looked toward the darkened windows, where the night pressed against the glass like a warning. "Because whatever your father is hiding," he said softly, "is worth far more than your engagement." Her breath caught. A new, sharper truth struck her. Her freedom was not the only thing at stake. James stepped closer, his voice steady, but laden with unspoken concern. "We're dealing with more than family secrets now." Annabelle felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Little did they know, the intruder had not come alone, and the next night would bring a danger neither of them expected. By the morning after the intrusion, Harrow Manor breathed with a new kind of tension, sharp, fragile, and alive. Annabelle moved through the halls with a quiet longing, not for romance, but for clarity, for control over her own life. She felt James's presence like a steady heartbeat somewhere in the background, a constant reminder of both safety and danger. He carried himself with the weight of duty, yet his eyes betrayed something softer, something he tried too hard to hide, and she sensed it. The subtle shift in him whenever their gazes lingered too long. It is strange, isn't it? How two lives can orbit each other without ever touching. Yet every step they took now seemed guided by a force neither wanted to name. A force that stirred between silence and breath, between caution and something deeper. Annabelle felt it rising like dawn at the edge of her awareness. James, meanwhile, fought it like a soldier resisting an unwinnable tide. He met with Lord Harrow that morning, attempting once again to uncover the truth behind the threats, but the Lord offered only fragments, denials wrapped in pride, excuses coated in polished etiquette. James saw through them all, recognizing fear in the man's trembling hands, in the way he avoided certain questions. Something about the ledger had left a crack in Harrow's composure, and James could feel the truth pressing to escape. Yet he also felt Annabelle's future tightening like a noose in the wake of every lie. When he stepped outside the study, he found her waiting in the corridor, her expression unreadable. She asked him quietly whether he believed her father capable of betrayal. James hesitated, because he knew that some answers were wounds disguised as knowledge. "Isn't it true that truth itself can become the sharpest blade?" He simply said, "Your father is hiding more than you know." That afternoon, they walked the grounds together again, though this time the silence between them carried weight rather than distance. Annabelle asked about the intruder, about the danger that now stalked the estate. James answered honestly. He no longer believed this was about her engagement alone. Someone wanted control, someone wanted leverage, someone knew far too much. Annabelle listened, but her attention drifted occasionally to James's voice, to the steadiness in it, to the concern he did not try to disguise. He noticed her gaze and looked away, as though afraid of crossing a forbidden boundary. Even so, something unspoken connected them, a tether woven from shared fear and fragile trust. Who hasn't felt this? The quiet pull between two souls who know they should remain separate. A pull that both comforts and terrifies. James felt it with every step, and Annabelle felt it with every breath. In the late afternoon light, they paused beneath the old oak tree at the edge of the property. The wind moved through its branches, scattering leaves like whispered confessions. James confessed that he feared the danger was far closer than they believed. Annabelle, surprising even herself, reached for his hand, just briefly, a touch like a breath of tenderness. He stiffened, not from rejection but from the intensity of what surged through him. Desire had never been part of his assignment, yet here it was, bright and undeniable. He released her hand slowly, gently, with the kind of restraint that reveals more than it conceals. The moment trembled between them, delicate as glass. Why is it that the heart awakens precisely when it shouldn't? Neither of them had the answer, but both felt the shift. That evening, Annabelle stood before her mirror, hearing again the truth James had offered her. All her life she had been shaped by others' decisions, her fate polished like the silver on the dining table. But James's honesty had given her something she had never known, the courage to question everything. She touched her reflection as though seeing herself for the first time, not as an heiress, but as a woman longing for freedom. Downstairs, James paced the hall, torn between two forces, desire and duty, each pulling him in opposite directions. He knew what he felt, yet he also knew what the world expected of him. But expectations crumble when the truth grows too large to contain. Their worlds were colliding, boundary by boundary, breath by breath. And in that collision, something irreversible was beginning. Neither yet understood its cost. Night settled once more over Harrow Manor, but sleep did not follow. Annabelle lay awake, replaying every moment of the day like pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit neatly. James stood at his window, the moon casting silver over his troubled expression, his chest tight with unspoken worry. Both sensed that they had stepped into dangerous territory, not because of the intruder, but because of themselves. Desire had become a living presence, pacing the halls between them, whispering possibilities and consequences alike. Boundaries meant to protect them now threatened to break apart. Somewhere in the house, a door creaked, soft, hesitant, as though another secret were preparing to step into the open. James turned sharply, instinct rising like flame. Annabelle sat up in her bed, heart pounding, and neither knew that the choice between duty and desire was about to demand a price neither was ready to pay. Morning light filtered through velvet curtains, pale and hesitant, as if uncertain whether it belonged inside Harrow Manor anymore. Annabelle descended the staircase with the quiet grace of someone who had forgotten how to move freely. Last night's tension clung to her like mist. Every truth James had revealed had opened a window into a world she had never asked to see. She felt the weight of her family's secret pressing against her ribs, a burden she had unknowingly carried since childhood. Her father sat in the drawing room, posture stiff, eyes shadowed, as though awaiting a verdict only he understood. Her mother fussed with teacups, too focused on porcelain to meet her daughter's gaze. Even silence felt dishonest between them. Isn't it strange how a home can become foreign the moment truth begins to shift beneath its floors? Annabelle stepped across the threshold of that room knowing something irreversible was approaching. She simply did not yet know how deeply it would cut. James entered moments later, summoned by a message he had not expected. Lord Harrow wanted to speak privately, an unusual request, and one James met with wary attention. He stood before the man with quiet resolve, the kind forged not from arrogance but from necessity. Harrow looked older today, as though the night had carved new lines into his face. He admitted, haltingly, that he had made arrangements to salvage the estate using Annabelle's engagement as collateral. It was a confession steeped in fear, not malice, yet the harm remained the same. James listened, feeling both pity and anger rise like opposing tides. He understood desperation, but he also understood the cost of choices made in darkness. Why do people so often sacrifice those they love in the name of survival? Lord Harrow did not know how to answer that, perhaps because there was no answer that absolved him. Annabelle overheard more than either man realized. She lingered outside the door, her breath thin, her pulse a startled drumbeat inside her chest. Every word struck her with the sharpness of a blade. Her future sold, her freedom traded away, her voice ignored. The truth she had feared was now laid bare. Her parents had woven a life for her not out of love, but out of necessity and betrayal. She felt the fracture inside her deepen, splitting the image of the family she had once trusted. Her fingers trembled on the doorframe, the wood cold beneath her touch. How easily the world expects women to bear wounds they never chose. She stepped back before they noticed her, swallowing a storm of emotion that threatened to spill. Revelation, once seen, cannot be unseen, and Annabelle felt herself shifting, one heartbeat at a time, into someone she had not yet met. Later that afternoon, when she confronted her parents, the air in the room stiffened like frost. Her mother attempted to soothe, speaking of responsibility, propriety, and what was necessary for their place in society. Her father insisted he had acted for the good of the family, his voice trembling under the weight of consequence. But Annabelle only heard what they did not say, that her own desires had never been considered part of the equation. Her life, her heart, her future, everything had been negotiated without her consent. Her voice, steady but fragile, broke the facade they had built. "You chose survival over me." The sentence fell between them like a shattered heirloom. She saw guilt flicker in her mother's eyes, panic in her father's, but neither offered the truth she needed, and that silence wounded her more deeply than any confession could have. James found her outside, standing beneath the oak tree where they had spoken before. Her posture was straight, but her hands trembled at her sides, betraying the storm within. He approached cautiously, not wanting to crowd her grief. She told him what she had heard, her voice soft but steady, as though naming the truth made it more real. James felt anger rise within him, not at her family alone, but at a world that taught women to swallow their own sorrow. He wished he could take that burden from her, wished truth came without wounds. But even compassion has its boundaries. "You deserved honesty," he said quietly. "You deserve choice." She looked at him then, her eyes reflecting both loss and awakening strength. And in that gaze, he realized she would never again accept the chains she had worn so politely. Night returned with heavy clouds, cloaking the estate in uneasy stillness. Annabelle remained awake, replaying every moment of the day until exhaustion blurred the edges of her thoughts. In the corridor, James lingered, unable to quiet the instinct that danger was drawing closer than ever. The ledger had exposed motives. The intruder had revealed desperation, but betrayal within the family. This changed everything. He feared what a cornered adversary might do now that truth had begun to slip through their fingers. A soft sound echoed down the hallway, a creak, a sigh of old wood under unexpected weight. James stiffened, every sense sharpening. Annabelle rose from her bed, sensing the same disturbance. And somewhere in the shadows, someone else moved with purpose and without mercy. Dawn arrived with a muted glow, hesitant as though unsure whether Harrow Manor still deserved the softness of morning. Annabelle stood at her window, watching light slowly climb the hillside, her breath steadying after a night of restless thoughts. For the first time, she saw the world outside not as a backdrop to her inherited life, but as a promise of freedom she had never allowed herself to imagine. Everything had shifted. The ledger, the betrayal, the intruder in the dark corridors. Yet it was the truth about her family that had broken something open inside her, something too long restrained. This was no longer about marriage or obligation. This was about her learning to choose herself. Isn't it remarkable how clarity often arrives only after everything else has fallen apart? Annabelle felt a quiet fire kindle in her chest, small but determined. It whispered of possibility, of courage, of a path untethered by expectation. She did not yet know where that path would lead, but she knew she must walk it. James entered the manor soon after sunrise, requested by Lord Harrow in a note left with a trembling hand. The Lord looked weaker this morning, his face ashen, his eyes marked by sleeplessness and guilt. He confessed more of the truth, how debts had suffocated the estate, how desperation had driven him to forge alliances rooted not in loyalty, but in fear. With each admission, James felt the full weight of the family's collapse pressing down, heavy as wet stone. Yet Harrow refused to name the source of the threats, insisting only that the past has a long reach. Those words unsettled James deeply. A past unspoken is often more dangerous than a threat declared. Why do people cling to secrets long after the cost of silence outweighs the truth? James waited for more answers, But Harrow could offer only fragments, barely enough to hold the whole story together, and certainly not enough to keep Annabel safe. Later, Annabel descended the stairs with a calm that surprised even her. She entered the drawing room, where her parents sat in a hush that felt less like peace and more like defeat. She spoke gently, but with a firm clarity she had never used before. She would not marry the man chosen for her. Her mother gasped softly, as though such defiance might cause the walls to crumble. Her father opened his mouth to object, but Annabel raised her hand, not in rebellion, but in quiet courage. "I will not give my life away to fix what others broke," she said, voice steady as morning light. Freedom often begins not with a shout, but with a simple refusal. Isn't it surprising how power shifts the moment a person decides to stand? The room pulsed with the shock of her words, then fractured beneath their truth. James witnessed the aftermath from the hallway, having been drawn by the sound of her voice. He had known she possessed strength, but seeing her claim it was something else, something luminous. It stirred something in him, a mix of admiration and fear, for he knew the consequences of defiance in families built on reputation. He stepped inside, offering her silent support, his presence a steady anchor in the storm. Lord Harrow's composure cracked entirely, his expression shifting from outrage to despair. "This estate cannot survive without that marriage," he whispered. Annabel held her ground. "Then let it fall." "I will not." Truth once spoken cannot be unspoken. It moves through a life like wind through wheat, changing everything in its path. James realized then that her choice would force a reckoning long overdue, and that reckoning would not come gently. As James followed Annabel into the corridor, she paused, leaning against the wall as though the weight of her awakening pressed too hard. He asked if she regretted it, her refusal, her words, her rejection of the life she'd been groomed to accept. Annabel shook her head softly. "I regret only how long it took to see the cost of obedience." Her voice trembled, but it held the strength of someone finally breathing her own air. James admired that strength more than he dared admit. It drew him closer in ways he could no longer deny. Yet he also felt dread rising like cold water at his ankles. Families pushed to desperation often lash out, not with reason, but with harm. Why does truth so often provoke danger in those who fear it? Annabel exhaled slowly, steadying herself. Little did she know, danger was already stirring behind the next door. Night returned with thunderclouds gathering low, their presence heavy enough to press against the walls. Annabel retired early, but sleep did not claim her. She remained alert, as though expecting the past to knock at her door. James patrolled the hall once more, his instincts sharpened by everything he had uncovered. The intruder, the ledger, the unraveling family ties, pieces of a puzzle that seemed to tighten around Annabel's fate. He paused outside her door, sensing movement somewhere deeper in the house, a shift too deliberate to ignore. Every muscle in his body tightened, the atmosphere electric with approaching crisis. He reached for the lantern. A floorboard creaked. A shadow moved at the far end of the hall, and in that instant, James understood. Breaking the chains had awakened not only her strength, but her enemy. The hall grew impossibly still, as though the very air sensed what was about to unfold. James tightened his grip on the lantern, the dim flame casting fractured light across the corridor. A shadow shifted at the far end, small at first, then unmistakably human, moving with a predator's patience. His pulse steadied, not with calm, but with practiced readiness. Danger, he knew, rarely arrived loudly. More often it slipped in through the cracks, wearing the scent of familiarity. Annabel, behind her closed door, felt a prickle of unease crawl along her spine. "You know this feeling too," the intuitive whisper that storms often begin in silence. James stepped forward, breath slow, footsteps measured. He had been waiting for this moment, though he wished more than anything that she would sleep through it. But fate rarely grants such mercy. The intruder moved quickly once discovered, darting toward the servants' stairwell with a speed that betrayed training. This was no thief, no misguided local. This was someone who knew the manor's layout intimately, someone with a purpose sharp as steel. James pursued him, lantern swinging wildly, light bouncing across portraits, watching with ghostly indifference. His footsteps pounded against the old wood, shaking dust from the rafters above. Annabelle opened her door at the sound, fear twisting through her breath as she glimpsed the chase. She called out his name, but the moment the sound left her lips, she wished she hadn't. Her voice marked her location like a beacon. Isn't it unsettling how fear sharpens every sound into consequence? The intruder paused mid-flight at the echo of her voice, and something in his hesitation chilled James to the bone. The chase drove downward into the manor's older corridors, where the walls narrowed and the floors creaked with age. Here, secrets lingered in stone, and whispers of the past stretched like unseen cobwebs across the threshold of every doorway. James caught a glimpse of the intruder's cloak, dark and heavy, brushing the edges of the stairwell. He lunged forward, grabbing the fabric, but it slipped from his grasp like water through fingers. The man vanished around a corner, footsteps fading into the maze of cellars beneath the estate. James cursed under his breath, quietly, sharply, the way those accustomed to restraint allow frustration to leak through. He knew descending further without support could be deadly, but he also knew turning back could cost Annabelle far more. What choice does one make when both paths lead into darkness? His hesitation lasted only a heartbeat. He retraced his steps up the staircase, knowing he needed to reach Annabelle before the intruder doubled back. When he reached her floor, he found her standing in the hall, barefoot, trembling, clutching a candle that flickered with her fear. Her eyes widened when she saw him, relief collapsing through her posture, though the candle nearly slipped from her hand. "You shouldn't be out here," he murmured, breath ragged not from the chase but from the realization of how close danger had come. "I heard something," she whispered, voice thin as thread. "I felt, watched." James stepped closer, lowering his voice as though the walls themselves might be listening. "You were." Truth sometimes arrives with a coldness sharper than winter air. Isn't it remarkable how a single sentence can redraw the entire shape of safety? Annabelle felt the world tilt, fragile and uncertain beneath her feet. He guided her back into her room, checking the windows, the wardrobe, even the shadows beneath the bed. Every corner felt heavier than before, burdened now with the knowledge that someone had walked these halls with intent. James explained that the intruder had returned for something, likely the ledger, perhaps something even deeper rooted in the family's past. Annabelle listened with wide, luminous eyes, fear flickering like the flame of her candle. Yet beneath that fear was something else, a quiet awakening, a resolve forged from betrayal, truth, and the nearness of danger. James saw it too, and it frightened him more than any shadow in the corridor. For courage in someone untrained is both a gift and a risk. He told her he would not leave her side. Not tonight. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, a warning wrapped in sound. And somewhere within the manor, a floorboard groaned as though under the weight of another step. Night thickened. The storm grew closer, and James sat near her door, listening to every breath of the sleeping house. Annabelle remained awake, heart refusing rest, tracing the patterns of moonlight across her ceiling. She sensed that the chase in the corridors had been only the beginning, that the true danger had not yet shown its face. James, with his hand near the hilt of his pistol, felt the same. A house built on secrets always invites its ghosts to return, and both of them knew, deep in their bones, that the next confrontation would not be in darkness, nor from behind. It would come openly. It would demand choices neither of them wished to make. A sudden sharp knock cut through the silence, too calm, too deliberate. And in that moment they realized the threat had not fled into the night. It had come to their door. The storm had quieted by morning, leaving Harrow Manor washed in pale light that felt almost like forgiveness. Annabelle stepped from her room with a steadiness she had not possessed the night before, her breath carrying the hint of something new. Clarity. The house felt different in the aftermath of fear, as though truth once awakened had swept through every corridor. James stood at the far end of the hall, still watchful, still carrying the weight of the night on his shoulders. Yet when he saw her, something in his posture softened, not out of weakness, but out of recognition. It is remarkable how destiny often waits patiently until a person finds the courage to choose their path. Annabelle approached him, her steps light, as though she were crossing an invisible threshold. She did not shrink from him. She did not hide behind expectation. She simply breathed, fully, for perhaps the first time, and with that breath, the day began to change. They walked together into the drawing room, where her parents sat in a silence that no longer held power over her. Annabelle spoke quietly but firmly about her decision, her refusal to marry, her right to chart her own life. Her father attempted protest, but the words faltered, as though he finally understood the cost of pushing her further. Her mother lowered her gaze, shame softening the edges of her once rigid posture. The weight of generational expectation hung between them like a heavy tapestry, but Annabelle did not carry it anymore. Truth, once spoken, does not retreat. It reshapes everything in its light. James stood behind her, not guiding her, not shielding her, but witnessing her transformation. Isn't it powerful when someone chooses themselves without apology? Her father exhaled a long, trembling breath, releasing burdens he had held too tightly. And in that release, the first fracture of healing quietly formed. When the conversation ended, Annabelle stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The garden glistened with dew, each droplet catching the sunlight like small promises of renewal. She walked the path toward the old oak, her fingers grazing petals, roots, stone, textures of a world she was finally ready to meet on her own terms. James followed at a respectful distance, unsure whether she needed solitude or companionship in this moment of awakening. But when she reached the oak, she turned toward him with a softness that held both gratitude and unspoken truth. He approached, heart steadying not with boldness but with humility. Freedom is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet invitation to share the same breath with someone who sees you. Annabelle looked at him, truly looked, and saw not just the man who had protected her, but the man who had witnessed her becoming. "What happens now?" she asked, voice gentle as morning wind, and for a heartbeat, even James did not have an answer. He admitted, with unusual vulnerability, that he did not know what her future held, or his own. There was no path carved neatly ahead, no map drawn by expectation or duty. Yet he knew one thing. He would support whatever direction she chose, even if it led far from him. This honesty, humble and unadorned, touched her more deeply than any declaration could. For the first time, she felt the weight of choice not as a burden, but as a gift. Isn't it strange how liberation often begins with the permission we give ourselves? Annabelle breathed in the scent of earth and possibility, letting the wind carry away the last remnants of fear. "Then let the future be ours to discover," she said. Not a promise of romance, not yet, but a promise of freedom. And James felt something shift within him, quiet but profound. A new horizon was forming, and they were stepping toward it together. Later that day, the solicitor arrived with documents concerning the estate's debts, its future, and the legal consequences of the truth uncovered in the ledger. Annabelle listened carefully, asking questions with newfound strength, making decisions with calm authority. Her father watched in silence, seeing perhaps for the first time not a daughter to be protected or positioned, but a woman with purpose. James remained nearby, offering support without overshadowing her voice. Sometimes empowerment is not a thunderclap, but a steady reclaiming of what was always yours. Annabelle signed the necessary papers, lifting the burden of old secrets from the house piece by piece. In doing so, she freed not only herself, but the family from a cycle of fear disguised as tradition. When the solicitor departed, the manor felt lighter, as though it too had exhaled. Annabelle stood in the center of the great hall, seeing it with new eyes. The world awaiting her felt vast, unbounded, and real. As evening descended, she and James walked the long path toward the western gate. The sinking sun painted the sky in amber and rose, a quiet farewell to everything she had been before. She paused, fingers brushing the iron gate, the last threshold between her old life and her chosen one. James stood beside her, not as protector, not as authority, but as someone who had become part of her journey. "You're certain about this?" he asked softly. Annabelle nodded. "Freedom has many faces, but the truest is the one chosen with a clear heart." She stepped forward, crossing into the open world as though stepping into her own name for the first time. James followed, a respectful pace behind, letting her lead. And just as the gate closed behind them, something unseen stirred. A soft pull of destiny, opening the path ahead. And it was in that instant, between the end and the beginning, that something within her fully awakened. But what awaited her ahead, neither she nor he could imagine.